Fear is the chief export of Compton. It's what everybody knows Compton for. The fear of drugs, fear of gang violence, fear of being cut down in the streets, fear of black people, fear of black men. These are all things that are associated with Compton. When you live a life where you're fearing walking down the street to school or fearing a drive-by happening at night, sort of sleeping in your bed, worrying about bullets coming through the window, I think that fear pushes everybody. I experienced that in a lot of different ways that really impacted how I saw myself and what it is that I strove for and what I fought for growing up. My name is Anthony D. Mays. I'm a software engineer at Google. I was not born in Compton. I was born in Omaha, Nebraska, which is sort of weird for somebody that's straight out of Compton. Then came to Compton when I was 4 years old. When I arrived in 1988, NWA's Straight Outta Compton album had just been released. Compton was put on the map.
Straight out of Compton, crazy mother named Ice Cube, from the gang called with attitudes.
I began to learn that if you're gonna live in Compton, you sort of have to endure this baptism of adversity and challenge. So I grew up on Mayo Avenue between Greenleaf and Alondra. I had been amazed by the people that I was seeing, that sort of quintessential image of these old style cars, booming hip hop music, mothers pushing their babies in strollers down the street, dudes just hanging out on the corner. And I found this fascinating. It was confusing, it was loud, but it was amazing. I grew up on a great street, but still I had this fear as a young person of being shot. Police helicopters, the ghetto birds as we called them, were always hovering over our neighborhood. And so everybody was aware of what was going on in the city. And even if you didn't know the details, you knew that there was something to be afraid of. Compton to me is a rose bush of beauty and pain. You see people who deal with despair, that deal with struggle, and they're just trying to get by from day to day. But you see this resiliency, you see this strength, and you see this courage to just keep on persevering. I've met some very beautiful people in Compton, and I've also had some of the toughest experiences of my life in that city. I first entered foster care after I went to elementary school. My kindergarten teacher questioned me about some marks that I had on my neck and on my back. And at first I told him that it was a bully. I told him it was a bully because that's what I was told to say. My teacher didn't believe me, and when they asked me again, I said, yeah, well, my dad had beat me because I was being a bad boy. And they called the police. Police came and picked me up, took me to Martin Luther King Hospital, where a doctor confirmed that I had been physically abused. So I was put into foster care. I went and bounced around to a couple of homes. All the while, my would-be foster parents had gone to night court to petition for custody for me and for my two brothers who had also gone to different foster homes. They had been our babysitters, and so they stood up and took us all into their home. Out of the kindness and love of their own heart, they went and snatched up 3 new boys, 3 new black boys, and brought them under their roof. From day one, as soon as we arrived there, they said, you know, you don't have to call us Mr. and Mrs. Crooms anymore. You can call us Mom and Dad. And I'll never forget that because, you know, it's at that moment that we fused as a family. And not a lot of kids get that opportunity. They bounce from foster home to foster home to foster home, eventually end up homeless. I was really fortunate and glad by the grace of God that that wasn't my story. A lot of people that I grew up with, you felt like you only had 3 options. It's either sports, rap music, or drugs. I knew that wasn't good for those things. And again, I didn't want to go to jail. I knew that doing drugs got you in jail or in the grave. But fortunately, at my elementary school, we also had a computer lab. And I remember using a computer for the first time and getting to engage with this technology. And it wasn't just something that was static. I could do things and it would react to me like it was a conversation. And that conversation was something that I couldn't let go of. And so for me, that was my first experience with technology and with computers, and I loved it. So I paid attention in class and did well with grades. And I just felt like education was gonna be a better option for me. I actually experienced bullying as a result. They would call me Oreo, which if you don't know what that is, as a black person who's black on the outside but white on the inside. I was getting called Steve Urkel because I wore these thick Medi-Cal glasses. Back then it hurt. I always felt like there was a bit of a crabs in a barrel mentality where I think some people knew that I was gonna go somewhere with my education, but in me doing that, it sort of judges them for not having that same kind of motivation or not being able to because their circumstance was different than mine. My parents tried to find the best education they possibly could for me in Compton. My school district was being taken over by the state, so I was in a really bad situation. In middle school, I went to NFL Yet, which is a school funded by the NFL, and there was a computer lab there, and the computer lab administrator was this black guy. I wanted to go in and play games, and I wanted to go and print rap lyrics. Bone Thugs and Harmony, See You at the Crossroads, it just came out, and nobody knew what they were saying. That was like my popularity card. I was the guy that could print Bone Thugs and Harmony lyrics. The administrator was like, look, if you want to use these computers, you need to know how the internet works. You need to know what the www means. And so I began to learn from him about how to do these more advanced things with computers. I had another mentor who was also a computer lab administrator. He got me and a few other folks together into a class, and he just told us, like, straight up, whatever I know, I'll teach you. He taught me about how to build computers and how to take them apart, how to install operating systems and manage servers. We were getting to play with all this fancy tech that I couldn't afford. By that time, I knew that I was going to go to college and get a computer science degree. But when I went to high school at the California Academy of Math and Science, things started to diverge. I started going to school with people who were really, really different from me. Our mascot was a graphing calculator. So imagine how ridiculous it is for a dude from Compton to go to a high school where the mascot is a graphing calculator. That's also the time when I started to experience imposter syndrome. I felt like, am I really smart enough to hang with, all these really smart people? And I just wanted to keep up, but I always felt like everyone else was doing better than me, like they were stronger and smarter than me. And that fear started to come back of, what if I'm not really able to do this? What if I don't get into college? What if I get into college and then I'm not able to finish? I felt like I saw other kids whose parents were engineers, doctors, lawyers. My parents weren't those things. Compared myself a lot to other people and just didn't feel like I was on that same level. It took me a while to understand, I was just different, not any necessarily better or worse than my peers. It took me a while to get used to just being in college. I just really, really struggled. And I always felt like I was the only person in my class that had been through what I'd been through. And certainly I was usually the only black person in my classes. And so I had to deal with the cognitive dissonance that comes with that. I remember being approached by Google. There was a recruiter on campus that handed me a pamphlet and wanted me to apply for an internship. And I remember looking at the pamphlet like, y'all don't want me. Y'all don't want no black man from Compton, former foster kid, working at Google. And certainly I'd never seen black people perceived as software engineers, in movies and in TV shows. So I just didn't have the notion of what it would look like for me to work at a place like Google. So I threw that application away, graduated from UC Irvine on the 5-year plan, bounced around to a couple of jobs. Google called me in 2011, 13 years later or something. I remember I was so excited I ran around my house like 3 or 4 times. Tried as best as I could to study and prepare. I had heard that Google tested candidates based on brain teasers. So I studied brain teasers for 2 weeks. Turns out that was a complete lie and I was totally unprepared. The Google interview didn't go well. And I really struggled with that because when people found out that I had applied, they were like cheering me on. They were like, oh, Anthony, if anybody can make it to Google, we know it's you. I had people at church that were praying for me. When I got the no from my recruiter, I had to go back and tell those people like, no, I didn't get in. And I felt like it wasn't just that I had let myself down, but that I'd let down a whole community of people. And so when Google called in 2012, called me again to interview, I told them no, because I didn't want to go through the embarrassment of failing again. Fortunately, Google called me again in 2013, which was just ridiculous, because who does that? And when I got that phone call, I was like, I gotta try this again. While I was on the bus and while I was on the train, I would have a little notepad and a pencil to study programmer problems. And I was studying that every day, like 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day. I would study at lunch, I would study before work, I would study after work. I would make my wife practice with me. I knew exactly the day that the recruiter was gonna call me and tell me whether I'd gotten an offer or not. I was on pins and needles the whole day. Like, I felt like I was just gonna die. I remember when the phone rang, I almost jumped out of my socks. Like, I almost had a heart attack and fell over. And the recruiter is like, hey, I've got somebody on the phone. Do you know who Laszlo Baka is? Who's the head of people operations for Google at the time. And I was like, okay, great. I failed, and they've sent in the big guns to let me down easy. A week before, I'd sent a letter to my recruiters thanking them, and I was just expressing my gratitude for having made it that far. Turns out that letter ended up getting forwarded on to the executive committee. Laszlo was like, yeah, so we got your letter, and I'm just proud to be able to tell you that we'd love to extend an offer to you at Google. Everything that he said after that pretty much turned into noise because I couldn't understand anything. Like I couldn't even feel my fingers. And it was a moment where I felt like I had achieved what I was put on earth to achieve. And so I called my wife, my parents, and I told my kids, and they sang me a little song. They were like, "Happy Google to you." People at my church were shedding tears. I was just floored by it and humbled by the reaction. I think about those moments all the time. I think about the people that I represent and the community that I come from and about how important it is for me to do a good job, to do good work, to teach others what I've learned, to pay that back. It's good to have that fire and to keep moving that forward. And it helps me sort of to deal with the fact that I made it out when a lot of other friends didn't. I had a friend of mine, we were the same age, and when he made it to 19 years old, he was shot and killed. And I always think about like what was so different about him and me that I made it out and that he didn't. And I don't think that there was anything really different about us. I believe that you know, I believe that I didn't deserve to make it out any more than he did. You know, I could have died just like he did, but I didn't. I don't think that I'm the hero of my own story. I think God is the hero of my story. I'm just along for the ride. But because I'm in this position, I have a responsibility to make the best of this. I carry that burden with me because I know that if I don't do this, who else will? As a software engineer at Google, I help to maintain software systems, particularly around data visualization, which is a fancy way of saying I help people make charts and graphs. At Google, we have tons of data, and it's really important that people be able to understand that. And I love being able to build tools that are used by people all over the world. I remember for a time I felt uncomfortable in my seat, like those first 3 or 4 months, and I couldn't figure it out. The office at the time, I would look out the window and there was a basketball court, and the basketball court would sort of put me at ease. And I couldn't figure out why I just felt this uneasiness until Google released their diversity numbers in 2014 and had sort of admitted to the world that 2% of employees at Google are Black, and only 1% of employees at Google are Black and in a technical role. All throughout my career, I've known about something called the Black tax. And the Black tax is this idea that as a Black person working in America, you have to work twice or 3 times as hard as someone who's not Black to get as far as they might. So for me, I'm always in that mode of defending who I am as a professional and as a Black man. So at Google, it was the same sort of deal, like work extra hard and try to do as much as possible. And that's when this light bulb went off in my head. And I looked to my left and looked to my right and realized like I'm one of only 3 Black people in my office of like 400 people. From that moment onwards, I began to commit myself to helping to do what I could to improve diversity and inclusion in tech, and helping to even more aggressively pay forward everything that I had learned and gained in my own career in life. If you're in Harlem, Chicago, in Africa, if you're in India, wherever you are, you can do this too if you're willing to put in the work and spend the time.